The 7 deadly sins of No Child Left Behind. What is No Child Left Behind? No Child Left Behind was put into place in 2001 by the Bush administration. It is based on 4 principles of educational reform: stronger accountability for results, increased flexibility and local control, expanded options for parents, and an emphasis on teaching qualifications and methods. Sin number 1, assuming that schools are broken. Most education reform is driven by a belief that the system is badly broken and must be fixed. In fact, the system is quite successful in fulfilling its historical mission of preparing children for agricultural and an industrial economy. The problem is that the world now requires a different set of skills. The jobs that the education system was designed to fill are in short supply. What is required is a hard look at what schools need to produce, and then a total retooling aimed at achieving that end. The reality is that anyone in business will tell you that successful workers in the new global economy must have skills of collaboration, ingenuity, problem solving, comfort with ambiguity, and a dozen other things, none of which are tested for and subsequently taught as a result of NCLB. And even the harshest critic of public education must admit that the majority of students are not failing. Nevertheless, we have constructed a federally mandated system that treats all districts, schools, and children pretty much the same, whether they are failing or succeeding dramatically. Sin number 2, conflating testing with education. A number of states were making significant progress on their statewide plans before NCLB was implemented, and they had to take a step back from more sophisticated uses of assessments to meet the lower standards set by NCLB. There's much more to education than what can be tested. When our sole emphasis is squarely on a single aspect of education, the entire process gets distorted. One of the greatest dangers posed by NCLB is that we will reach a point where most kids meet an acceptable standard set by the tests, but do so at the expense of a broader and deeper learning experience. If we put too much emphasis on a lower common denominator, we will be sacrificing higher possibilities for our children. Sin number 3, harming poor children and ignoring the realities of poverty. A recent study showed that children closest to making AYP, not those most in need of assistance, are the ones receiving the bulk of the attention. Drilling poor students on basic skills while their middle-class counterparts partake of a richer curriculum will not close the real learning gap between students. While history is replete with stories of heroic exceptions, such as Abraham Lincoln, who was born in a log cabin and later became president, there's no real evidence that whole groups of people have been elevated by ignoring the chains that bind them. Sin number 4, relying on fear and coercion. Motivation has always been the key to good education. Unfortunately, NCLB relies for motivation on the blunt force of threats and punishments. Children are subjected to days of exams annually with the time taken away from instruction. We have actually reduced the time we spend on instruction so that we can increase the time we spend on measuring the results of the instruction. To offset this, many schools have chosen to neglect subjects not covered by the tests so that the curriculum has been narrowed. Collaboration, not coercion, is what is needed. Sin number 5, lacking clarity. Any accountability system should be clear and understandable to those it is accountable to, parents and other citizens. Most parents find the AYP model to be confusing and, when the explanations are given, counterintuitive. Why would you hold special education children who have an individual education plan because of their needs to the same standards as children who do not have those needs? Why would you test children in English when they do not yet speak English? Any accountability system needs to have a sense of authenticity if it is to be useful. Sin number 6, leaving out the experts. Those at the federal level do not and cannot know better how to educate a child than those working at the child's level. In other professions, bureaucrats don't try to second-guess the work of professionals who deliver the services. For example, pilots, while subject to rules and regulations, are still presumed to know better how to fly the plane than their passengers. No federal law that takes the professionals out of the decision-making process will ever work. Professional judgment must be taken into account if we ever have any hope that NCLB will work. Sin number 7, undermining our international competitiveness. Finally, the greatest sin committed by NCLB is a sin of omission. NCLB fails to address the core question for America: how do we sustain our place in a global environment? NCLB's answer is that drilling our children will allow them to compete with the Chinese. Our society seems to produce unusually creative and entrepreneurial people. But how can we be creative if all we are learning is how to take tests? Finally, another reason one of my other teachers told me is a reason teachers don't like NCLB. Teachers become accountable for students. So if students are failing, the teacher may lose her job. However, outside factors aren't considered. What if a student hadn't had breakfast that morning, so they're not focusing? Or what if a student's parents aren't regulating whether they do their homework or not? Those factors that could totally have an impact on whether a student fails or passes, and those factors that have nothing to do with the way the teacher teaches, could totally have an impact on whether that teacher keeps or loses her job.